Hey everybody, how you doing? Welcome back. Today I want to go over our participation activity for the week, looking at the costs of production, how firms figure out how much to produce and how much labor and capital to hire based on the costs. And so in this chapter, we talked about firm costs in terms of them being explicit or implicit, in terms of them being fixed or variable. And then we looked at our three main curves: average variable cost, average total cost, and marginal cost, and graphed them. And that's the part I want to review with everyone today, is how we go through and do that. So to do that, we did two main activities. First, we went through and actually used this table here to go ahead and add up, subtract, divide, and multiply to fill in all the costs associated with production. And then we went ahead and graphed those curves. And I'm going to go ahead and graph it up here for everyone. But before we do that, I'm going to go and pull up the table on the screen here and review how we calculated those average variable cost, average total cost, and marginal cost spots. So let me get the sheet pulled up for you and we'll take a look. Okay, so this table has a list of prices. We have our fixed costs, our variable costs, our total cost, average fixed cost, average variable cost, average total cost, and then marginal cost. And what we want to remember here is that all of these are very straightforward in terms of what they mean and what they say. So remember, our fixed costs are costs that don't change as we scale production up and down, and our variable costs are costs that do change. They're going to tend to go up as costs go up. We're going to see our variable costs go up as quantity goes up. And then total cost, we want to remember, is just going to be fixed costs plus variable costs. And so we start out with nothing in the total fixed cost column. And so what we want to do is figure out what that fixed cost is going to be. We see 0 in the variable cost and 80 in the total cost. So we know that if the variable costs are 0, that our fixed cost have to be 80, because 0 plus 80 will equal 80. So we can go ahead and pop that in there. Our total fixed costs are going to be $80. And the nice thing is that fixed costs don't change when we scale production up. So we know that if it's $80 at one level, it's going to be $80 at every level of production. So that right there will fill in that whole column for us. They're fixed. These costs stay fixed whether we're producing 0 units or 100 units. Well, at least for this point, for our purposes here, from 0 to 7. And then variable costs, those are going to be the costs that scale up. If we're not producing anything, they're 0. But here, we're producing 1 unit, and we see that our total cost is now $130. So we know that our variable costs are going to be 130 minus 80, or $40. Or sorry, $50. Here we go. $50. Because 130 minus 80 is 50, 80 plus 50 is 130. We can also go ahead and calculate these other cost curves for ourselves, because we know that these are going to be straightforward calculations. Average fixed cost is just going to be our fixed cost divided by quantity. Our average variable cost is going to be variable cost divided by quantity. And our average total cost is going to be total cost divided by quantity. So that's pretty straightforward too. Since this row we're just dividing by 1, we're going to have this be kind of the easiest row of them all. So total fixed cost of 80 divided by 1 is just going to be 80. Variable cost of 50 divided by 1 is going to be 50. And total cost of 130 divided by 1 is 130. The last thing we want to consider is our marginal cost. Marginal cost is the cost of producing one more unit, an additional unit. And so formally, it's the change in total cost divided by the change in quantity. But since quantity is only changing by 1, we just need to look at how much total cost has changed as we go from 80 to 130. 130 minus 80 is 50. So our marginal cost of that first unit is 50 because the costs have changed by $50. For a quantity of 2, we can go ahead and find total cost by adding fixed plus variable, and that will give us $160. Average fixed cost is going to be 80 divided by 2, or $40. Average variable cost is also going to be 80 divided by 2, which is another $40. And then average total cost is 160 divided by 2, or $80. Now for marginal cost, we're going from a quantity of 1 to a quantity of 2, and a total cost of 130 to a total cost of 160. So our marginal cost is actually only changing by $30. So that would be our next marginal cost point. And we can see that this is the part of our curve where marginal costs are falling, which is good. That means those diminishing marginal product effects haven't set in yet. The next thing we want to do is go to our quantity of 3. We've got fixed costs of $80 and total cost of $186. So we know that our variable cost is going to be $106. I've got some of the calculations already done here, but what I do need to calculate, and I'm going to grab my handy dandy calculator, is what the total cost, 186, divided by 3 is. And that's going to give me a value of $62. Finally, we want to calculate our marginal cost. Again, marginal cost is just the difference or the change in total cost. In this case, it's going to be 186 minus 160, or $26. Now I can go through and continue. In this row, you can see we don't have variable cost and we don't have total cost, but we do have average variable cost. So to find total variable cost, I can just reverse this and say, okay, if average variable cost is $32.50 and the quantity is the quantity is 4, what's $32.50 times 4? And that will give us a total variable cost of $130 and a total cost of 80 plus $130, or $210. So far, so good. Average fixed cost is going to be 80 divided by 4, or $20. And then we can also double check our work here. We have average total cost is $52.50. If I go back and say, what's $52.50 times 4, I'm going to get $210. So I know that I'm correct. And then to find marginal cost, again, it's going to be the change in total cost as I move from 3 to 4. It's going to be 210 minus 186, which in this case, moving from 186 to 210 is going to be $24. Oops, wrong spot. There we go. Here we're adding $80 of fixed cost to $160 of variable cost to give us a total cost of $240. $80 divided by 5 is going to be $16. $160 divided by 5 is going to be $32. And now our marginal cost is the difference between total cost, the difference in total cost between 4 and 5, or the difference between 210 and 240, $30. Now we are definitely seeing the diminishing marginal product effect. As we look at these marginal costs go down and then back up, that tells us we're on that upward sloping part of the marginal cost curve where the diminishing marginal product of labor is really becoming expensive for our firm. We're in the same place here. We've got averages but no totals, so I'm going to go ahead and add multiply 3333 by 6, and that gives me 199.998. I'm going to call that 200. It rounds up, and that's good because 280 or $200 plus $80 divided by 6 is going to be 46.67, which means I'm correct. Finally, in this row, we want to look at the marginal cost. The marginal cost is the difference in total cost from level 5 to level 6, so that's going to be another $40. Marginal cost continues to rise. And then we want to go ahead and fill in our last column the same way we have, calculating our total cost, our average variable cost, and our final marginal cost, which is going to be $59. Does that make sense? Hopefully it's pretty straightforward. Now we want to take it to the whiteboard and graph it. Okay, so we said in class, and you can see in the textbook and in your slides and notes, that we're going to continue to graph in a quantity and value space, but we're not really talking about price anymore. We're talking about cost. We're talking about the cost of producing each unit of output. So I'm going to put my Q down here and my price up here, and I'm going to be talking about quantities from 1 to 7. So let's do that. And then I want to go basically from the highest cost in these curves. If I'm looking at average total cost, average variable cost, and marginal cost, the high is 130 and the low is about, I believe, $24. But really, most of the action is happening between sort of the 60s and 30s. So I'm going to kind of just go down here as 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, and just know that my 130 is going to kind of go off the rails, and that's okay, because that's going to be 110, that's 120, that'll probably be 130 up there. But that's not going to be the end of the world because there's just one big point. In class, I graphed marginal cost first. I don't know why I do that. I really like it that way, but let's try graphing average variable cost first, and then average total cost, and then marginal cost, and see how that goes. So average variable cost is going to go and start based on our calculations at a quantity of 1 and a value of 50. So that's going to be right about here. And then at a quantity of 2, average variable cost is going to be 40, about there. At a quantity of 3, it's going to be 35, 33. At a quantity of 4, it's going to be 32.50, which is barely any change on the scale I have. At a quantity of 5, it's going to be 32, which is an even smaller change. That's basically flat. And then at 6, it's going to be, or sorry, wait. At 5, it's, I got a little skewed there. There we go. There's 5, and there's 6. Which is at average variable cost of 33.33, which is slightly higher than the 32. And then finally we have the average variable cost at a quantity of 7 is $37, which is back up to about here, not quite at 40. Ooh, that's about right. Let's put it right there. So that's going to be our average variable cost curve. And it's going to tend to be like a little smile, right? Kind of hard to see. Let me bring this a little closer. Okay. The next thing I'll do is graph average total cost. Average total cost is going to start way up here at 130, and it's going to drop immediately. Quantity of 2, it's going to drop down to 80. At a quantity of 3, it's going to drop down even lower to 62, which is just barely above 60. And then at a quantity of 1, 2, 3, at a quantity of 4, it's going to be 52.50. It's going to be just above 50 right there. And then at a quantity of 5, it's going to be 48, which is just slightly lower. At a quantity of 6, it's 46.67. And at a quantity of 7, it's slightly up higher at a quantity of 47.86. So that's going to be more like that as our average total cost curve. And then the last curve we'll graph is the marginal cost curve. It's going to be our fishhook shaped curve. It's going to start the same place as average variable cost. And then it's going to drop down with the additional productivity of those first couple of workers. So the first worker gives us a lot of productivity, but a lot of cost, $50. The second worker is going to add a marginal cost of $30. The third worker's marginal cost is 26, which is still a little bit lower, but we can see that diminishing marginal productivity start to set in as the marginal cost is starting to slow in its descent. And then it's going to bottom out at $4 and $24. And then at 5 units, it's going to be marginal cost of $30. And that's going to be right here, right at the average variable cost curve. Right? And then at a quantity of 6, it's going to be above the average variable cost curve at a quantity of 40. Right in between these two. And then at a quantity of 7, it's going to be higher than both at a quantity of 59. So I'll put that right there. So that's our marginal cost curve. Pretty close. It goes a little bit more like that. There we go. I do think it's easier to start with marginal cost because it's kind of like a little anchor for where all the other cost curves end up going. That's our cost curve for our production, right? Those are the costs associated with producing. The last thing we did together in class was I did go through and ask some questions about diminishing marginal returns and where costs are minimized. And so we know that marginal returns are minimized when marginal cost is at its lowest. So that's where we see the diminishing marginal returns set in. Where average variable cost is minimized is going to be right where those two meet, which is about 5 units. Average total cost is also minimized where marginal cost crosses it. And that's because you want to remember that these are the averages and this is the value we're adding to the average. So if they're equal right here, and then we add a higher cost than the average, it's going to start to pull the average up. Regardless of which average curve we're talking about, when we add a higher value to it on the margin, we're going to be pulling those averages up. If you have questions about that, let me know. The textbook does a good job of talking about it, but it is an important concept. But that's how we graph our cost curves. Going forward after this chapter, it's not going to be the most important thing in the world that your cost curves are perfect, but we are going to use them for the next 4 chapters as we talk about how firms maximize profits in different market structures and different kinds of competition. So it is really really important to be comfortable with these curves and have a sense of how they work, what they mean, and what's going on with them. We can think about things like efficient scale happening where average total costs are minimized. And remember, efficient scale is going to be where firms are producing the right quantity, minimizing their costs. All that stuff is going to come into play with these curves. So let me know what questions you have. Feel free to review your notes, review the textbook, and review your very beautiful participation assignments. And I will see you next time. Have a great day.